Karen Burchill, Creative Katie, with a bit of a show and tell on and some ATCs. ATCs are great for trying out different techniques, for coming up with a little bit of a prototype for ideas to use later on a canvas or in a journal page. And it's very easy and simple, and because it's such a small piece, it doesn't take a lot of time. Although you can take a lot of time. ATCs can be single layer or they can have multiple layers, and pretty much the sky's the limit. So that being said, I'm just going to go and do a show of these. So on this one, we did the salt technique with some colors. I stamped gold with a script stamp and embossed with white embossing powder on there. And this actually ended up being a design that I use on many Christmas cards. I actually created this one in the middle of July. So this one, again, I used my Inktense blocks and I just activated it with water till I got the colors I liked, dried it. Then I did multiple stamps in the background and then in the foreground and painted on the top, outlined with gold and splattered with gold, and used my stylus to put the dots around the edge. You don't have to start with paint. You can use those jelly prints or brayered off sheets. This was one of those brayered off sheets, and I absolutely loved it. So I put it on, and all I did was stamp with Versamark and use black embossing powder. I also just dipped the edges into the black embossing powder and then into the Versamark, then the black embossing powder, so the edges are embossed, and that gives a nice kind of feel to it and finishes it off nice. Another jelly print with a black stamp on top. So again, this is just a single layer, but you have lots of that color because you've done all the playing around with color when you created the jelly print. This one, Follow Your Art, I used my Lindy sprays and I used the salt technique. And you can see the texture and maybe a little bit of the shimmer. I applied a stamp onto deli paper, glued it on, and then painted it and outlined it. So you can see the shimmer on there because I paint it with the Lindy sprays again. Another one using the salt technique. Oh, got it upside down. And I've used the salt technique, and there's a video, and I'll link it up to the video that I have. I've used it with pretty much every medium. Acrylic paint, my sprays, my Inktense blocks, as well as watercolor paint, which is where I learned the technique to begin with. This one and this one and this one are all using the plastic wrap technique. And you can see the wonderful texture that you get. So again, plastic wrap technique, again, all those color mediums, watercolor, sprays, gelatos, Neocolor 2s, Inktense blocks, dilutions, paints, dilution sprays. They will all work. You will get a slightly different effect, but they will all work. You just have to adjust to it. And trying it out on little ATCs is the perfect way to try out those samples. And once you have it, you can just write on the back and saying, you know, this one, and I have it on some of them because that's the one I did, you know, Lindy Starburst, and write, you know, salt technique, what kind of salt. So you kind of have a recipe card and an example of a technique that you can use. This one is a little bit more going on. I put the color down, I put a flexible modeling paste through the stencil, and then I have put more color. I sprayed with my Lindy spray and got some of that shine on there till I got the colors. Used my pile of quotes that I have previously stamped out, put that, and this 3D flower I actually got at the dollar store, and they're absolutely beautiful. This is pretty much a single layer card, and this was done on, had black gesso on it. When I bought my black gesso, I did a whole bunch of ATCs with black gesso, and then I tried it and I didn't like it. But then I found a video where you put white gesso on top of it in places, and then when you put the color on, the paints on, it really makes it pop, and that's what I did here. Then I went on the back and I painted it black again, but the Hope, and you can see those colors. Some of that's white gesso. There were stamps, and so you get some darker and lighter, and you get lots of shading. So it's a technique that I want to explore a lot more. And I love this quote. Hope stands for have only positive expectations. So this was on black gesso, and then it was a cleanup of paint. Loved the texture. I stenciled, and I just wrote through the stencil to get that, and then put a quote and outlined it. So very simple, but very effective. By the Sea, painted on black, stamped with white, silver, gold, using my Michael's dollar bin stamps, and just love it. It's simple in its simplicity. This one, I put drywall tape underneath it, and you can see the texture. Our drywall tape is different than the stuff that you can source in the States. In the States, it has holes in it. This look more like mesh. Then on top of that, I put a napkin, which I stenciled the flowers on. Edged it in black, quote, outlined in white. Very fast, very effective, lots of texture. This ATC I did with my Dilutions paints, and again I just used the applicator and put the background with the blues and the yellows and the greens, stamped through a stencil, and then just stamped with a quote. In the end, we only regret the chances we didn't take. This peacock feather was done on a black gessoed surface, and I put gel medium through it onto the card first. And depending on the light, you can see it's kind of got that iridescence, and it kind of takes on more or less color. And I outlined it with my silver pen. This one, which I love, and I don't know if you can see the texture. I tried a couple different techniques, and none of them really worked. I was using, what technique is that? My crackle paint, and it wasn't quite working. So I redid it, and so you get some interesting patches that, would never be able to be duplicated, but in the end, I love the card. So this was a cleanup print, put a stamp on it, on deli paper, and the quote. The journey is the start of the adventure. And you got some gold in there. This one, Escape, I glued down pieces of a napkin. I put some tissue paper through an embossing folder, and I don't have a big shot or any of those, so I just kind of embossed it by pressing hard on it, and so the butterfly was cut out of that. So you can see that texture, which I rubbed gold paint lightly and around the edge. The waves of the sea help me get back to me. So again, a background, there's some stamping in the background, and I put some modeling paste through my swirl stencil, one of my favorite swirl stencil, and I love the movement of this, and a little bit of iridescent paint. This one, put the color down and then masked off the areas and painted with black. You can also see my script stamp in there. So this is a very effective technique to do with a variety of colors. Dance, I just love the movement of this. I've got some music paper down there, some tissue paper, some napkins, and I stenciled on top of it. And I just like the movement of it. And I sprayed it with my Lindy's Starbursts, and you get that shimmer. This one, I used my Dilutions paints. And I stenciled, this was on black gesso, and I put white gesso on top a little bit, rubbed the color on it, stenciled through. I have my script stamp there, and then I had to use the Dilutions paint to paint some deli paper, and I stamped the flowers, and I have several of the flowers there. I think what I'm going to do, just to perfect them and make them a little bit nicer, I might just apply some pouring medium, and kind of make them a little bit firmer so that they might look like this one. They'll just have a little bit more stability because the deli paper isn't standing up. Quick stamp. This guy, Lift Your Spirit. This was a big mistake that I decided and discovered a new technique. What I had done is I had done a mask, or I had done a black gesso, and I had the flower. But when I had put the paint through, it kind of, the edges were really sloppy, so I decided to put a paper towel that was colored with the same colors on top, thinking I'll just, you know, cover it up and start fresh. And what I discovered is that the black that was in the background, it all came through. So where it was lighter, the flower appeared. So the flower is actually under the paper towel, but it kind of came through. So I'm going to try to duplicate this technique because I really love how it worked out. This was a cleanup print, or cleanup paint. I just kept, every time I had more paint on there, I just cleaned it up on the next card, and that became the background. A stamp, and just I stamped on deli paper and then glued it on, and I had a little bit of stickles. I don't know if you can see there in the middle of the butterflies. No, you're not going to be able to see it. Stamp. This one I've shown on Facebook. I have a couple of my, I don't have the other one here, my Julie Nutting Prima Dolls, and I just put part of it on there. And I just mopped up the paint again, and you get this beautiful, lovely texture on there. So, I mean, that's great if you're making, kind of doing assembly line. Clean up the paint, keep going. This one was a jelly print where I used my texture plates, and then I cut out from paper napkin, the purple. This actually has multiple, I don't know if you can see how thick it is, there's multiple layers. I did some embossing underneath, some gel medium, and there's multiple layers. This was fail, 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 and I just kept going, and so the card is very thick. But in the end, I really like it. It's a very bright, happy one. Nothing changes if nothing changes. And so again, I did this. I randomly put some white gesso on top of the black gesso, rubbed some color on it, and then did a masking technique for the butterfly to come out. And so you can see, and it just brings out layers. Like, you don't even have to worry about that. And then I have some silver paint that I rubbed on it. So thank you very much for joining me on the flip through. I hope you take some time and create your own ATCs. They are a lot of fun, and then you can look back and use it as inspiration for other pages. Thank you.